Good morning, Biju. It's great to have you with us today from calling today from Toronto, right? Right,
Yes,
Biju?
good morning. How are you? Yes, from Toronto today.
Great to have you with us. Biju is the Director of Corporate Business Services and Automation Center of Excellence for Umbridge. And he's a technological leader with over 20 years of hands-on experience in driving business transformation and operational excellence to achieve business outcomes. He has worked in Japan, India, the United States, and Canada in energy, healthcare, telecom, retail, banking, and government. Incredible cross-industry range. He's a dedicated contributor to the community as an advisor to nonprofits and early stage startups to help define their value proposition and scale. He has a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from Kansas State University and an MBA from the Kellogg-Schiller School of Business, Northwestern New York University in the United States and Canada. So, Biju, it's a real pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise and the journey in a moment of such dramatic change in the oil and gas industry.
Well, thank you. Yeah, good morning, and good morning to everybody who's online, kind of listening. And this is we were just talking when we started that this is a interesting opportunity in the times that we are, that we're able to connect in this platform in this way across the globe of many people contributing. So today, my topic is the perfect storm and driving operational excellence in oil and gas. It's a 5 or 6 slides, so it's about 35 minutes as stated. We'll kind of go through it, and of course, the intent here is for me to kind of share as I talk to my peer group within the industry, sort of what we're seeing, what we're doing, and really kind of challenging ourselves in this time of not stopping the push for operational excellence. If anything, to double down on it in a time of pandemic and so on. So just to give you some context, I work for Enbridge. We have 4 big business units, if you will. We have the liquid pipeline business that's probably the world's longest, most complicated crude and oil liquids transportation system. We also have our natural gas transmission midstream.
Biju, I don't know if you're sharing your presentation at this point. I just want to double check on that with you because it's not coming across. Yeah, it's on now. Thank you.
Okay, so I think there's some different. Anyway, yeah. So this, is the company I work for and kind of our assets across North America. 4 big business lines that we have. As I stated, liquid pipelines, natural gas transmission, gas utilities, and of course, you have growing renewable energy and power. So the context of the story that I'm about to tell you is really rooted in this kind of the map that you see in the businesses we're in. Just to give you sort of the what our industry faces today. One is of course supply and demand influenced by the pandemic we're in today. There was a point when there was so much supply. Still, there's so much supply that it was almost like oil was being given away, and that of course has a huge cost pressure as we go through. Volatile prices and price wars. We saw of course changes in pricing of the commodity, as well as price wars that were happening around OPEC, Russia, Iran, etc. That of course created its own part of the perfect storm that was happening as we were going through. Environmental regulations, definitely regulations weigh into the industry quite a bit as to what the regulator wants from the industry itself, as well as, of course, government policies and public opinion. There is a trend towards people being more environmentally conscious and expecting the industry to demonstrate that it is actually doing everything that it can to be as responsible as possible to what's happening. And that's true across, whether it's plastics, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's retail, you see that everywhere. That's happening. And renewables are emerging. Any major energy company today has a renewables group, whether it be wind, solar, geothermal, whatever may be the case. And that does create a different kind of abundance over time. And there is actually abundance of energy in natural gas, for example. there's abundance of natural gas in North America today, which of course has all sorts of impact on commodity pricing. Then you have an older industry that has an aging workforce. We see that here, where not a lot of young people are getting in the industry. So that creates another kind of adding to the perfect storm, where as the workforce ages and as people know and understand and collected this intellectual capital over the number of years, it's becoming more and more difficult to keep it as people retire, etc. So three major challenges that I really see the industry is facing today. One is the reduction of costs, or the operating costs, capital costs, whatever may be the case. Optimizing performance of assets, cost, risk performance, that making sure that you can extend it as much as possible, and of course improve the environmental footprint so that it deals with public opinion and environmental regulations, and of course those kinds of things. So as I was thinking through this, I thought those are the three big things that the industry is facing today that actually you have to deal with. Even the pandemic just makes it worse, as a matter of fact, or puts even more pressure on the industry to reduce costs and optimize performance of assets, because that is actually solely in that control. Driving operational excellence, I thought what was really important is, maybe we can get grounded on some common terminology. So for me, driving operational excellence is really execution of the business strategy, better than the competitors you're in, regardless of where you are, whether you're in this industry or not. That is really what it is. So operational excellence also relates to execution excellence. And there's lots of information and research out there, and actually proven fact that driving operational excellence in any industry or any organization will lower your cost, will lower your operational risk and the exposure that you have, because you are so focused and intent on exactly what that looks like. Now, how do you do that? Well, operations, right? And operations is made of workflows. So understanding how you do work across a company from an end-to-end perspective, and really knowing what performance looks like, becomes key in driving operational excellence. And the advantage we've had over the last 10, 15, 20 years has been this digitalization of business processes. So whether it's ERPs, whether it's systems and solutions and technology, etc., has actually given us a collection and a lot of information, a wealth of information that now you can actually look at and really understand what's happening. So the graph on the right is meant to say that there's a huge, there's a gap between the rate of change of technology and the rate of change of business, which means there's a delta that companies and organizations should and can leverage to actually be better, faster, cheaper, more dominating the market, etc. So rapid innovation and convergence has reduced costs of lots of technology that is now available that wasn't there before. And because a lot of digitalization has taken place within industry, as more and more systems are implemented, there's lots of information there that you no longer have to do large scale analysis, because there's lots of things that are out there, tools out there. And I think next speaker from Salonis will tell you the same thing. They do a lot of process mining. They have tools that actually tell you what's happening within the systems that you have. So there are two things that actually come out when it comes to reducing costs or optimizing performance of assets. One is process automation, which is elimination of manual work. That's one, or increasing quality, or increasing speed and reducing cost. And the other one is process mining, which is visibility to how processes are actually working. All those projects and all those system implementations that happened, where there's lots of focus on what the end-to-end process looks like, I think a lot of people, if you were to actually do this, you'd be shocked as to exactly what is actually happening in those systems today compared to what you had envisioned it to be some time ago. And that is just a fact, because as organizations mature, as they look at what they're doing, as people move in and out, a lot of things change. One of the challenges in operational excellence is exactly that, is that if you don't capture some of that IP that people have, and or there's really no way of monitoring and really knowing what good looks like, things will change. And if you don't know where things are changing over time, it's like elasticity, right? Over time, You'll drive some inefficiency because people go in and out of a process. And then you'll have to re-engineer, and you'll contract again and say, well, this is a better way of doing it. The difference now is you can do a lot of that without undertaking massive projects, which take time, which take commitment at a large scale. And with all the organizations, especially now, if you look at what's happening, in a pandemic, where there's lots of other priorities that organizations are struggling with, it becomes really difficult. And for all the operational excellence people, it becomes very difficult to get traction, because in the list of priorities, you're kind of dealing with the current state, and it becomes really, really difficult to say, well, where does this lie compared to everything else, and what does that actually mean? So I think driving operational excellence in this time where we are, and I put it in the context of COVID only because that's where we are today, over and above other pressures that were already there for the industry, is actually now, right? There's no reason to actually stop. If anything, you should accelerate, because of the fact that you are in a distributed environment today, because people aren't next to each other. There have been lots of cases where as we go through this operational excellence agenda in a pandemic where it's a distributed workforce, you find a lot of processes breaks actually come out. Because before, when people used to be next to each other, they would work it out. But now, because they're not next to each other, it's more difficult and more obvious of where there is opportunity for driving operational excellence to KPIs and metrics. The other one is, it is very normal that as you go through this, that this probably won't be the only time when we have a situation like this. I think there's lots of studies out there that say that business should be more resilient. You should have a better business continuity plan. You should look at, how do you survive and continue operating in a time when the situations like this could be more and more happening. And that requires to look at, are there things in an organization or in a process from an operations perspective that you can automate, so that a process robot can still function, processing the predictable, repeatable business processes, driving to a set of KPIs and metrics that you have without any human intervention, so that things can continue. And the other one is, in a difficult time, economic times, you want to make sure that you have as much capacity as possible for people, and so that you can redeploy them within an organization to look at something, do other work, versus the ongoing, repeated and mundane work. So I think the rate of change is there. It's a matter of, our organizations committing from an operational excellence perspective to leverage technology and people and process, overall game plan and strategy to make sure that they're driving, the best outcome possible. And if you look at, some of these rapid innovation places, process mining and RPAs are not limited to just one. You have to look across the company, across every function that you have, and really see, how can you leverage these things to drive excellence. So the question is, well, great. So how do you do that, and what's the easiest and the fastest way to do it? So I am probably over the years I've become more of a minimalist, which is you really look at a situation and say, what's the minimum that you need to either get started, or what's the minimum that you need to either test something and see if it works, or what's the minimum that you need, even when it comes to people and change, to actually be able to execute. So there, what you see in front of you is kind of the two areas that I think organizations should use, and we are as well, to leverage to drive operational efficiencies, whether it's quality, whether it's cost, whether it's speed, and really drive out, the excellence pieces of what we need to do. So for RPA, here's what I would suggest to be a minimalist. Set up a center of excellence, and contrary to what I've heard from many people, it actually doesn't take long, right? It doesn't take long if you are a minimalist, which is, what is the minimum that you need to set up a COE? You need a platform, and you need some steps in a process to make sure you can do assessments and build, test, deploy, and support. That's the minimum that you need. I would actually say that even when it comes to your own staffing, when you start, I would say find a couple of people within the organization who are smart people, and then build out a network of partners and service providers who can help you get there faster. This is not a time to actually, build it yourself, everything, because that's not it. That one, it takes too much time. Two, why not take something that's already there and run it through it? Part two, hunt for repeatable and predictable, consistent processes that have manual work. That's a hunt. Look at end-to-end processes that you have from an operations perspective, and supply chain, and finance, and HR. This list goes on and on. There's lots of material out there that actually kind of tell you, depending upon which area you want to focus on, where the biggest bang for the buck is. Do it. Start with a handful and get going once you have the COE set up with some partners, and prove. It's very easy to prove. RPAs are probably the easiest ones to prove the business case, because you're doing some work today and you're not doing it tomorrow after you implement. Very easy to calculate the ROI and the overall cost to it. Quantify and automate. So once you find these processes that have lots of manual touch points of work, quantify them. What does that look like? Do an estimate. Don't have to be accurate. A range is just fine, and automate it. And with lean governance. And governance is very important, of course, right? But I'm a firm believer in lean governance, which is, again, what is the minimum governance you need to actually execute, plan and execute and repeat. And for me, governance is also, how do you help teams be successful versus getting in the way and asking a lot of questions and asking a lot of reports and so on. So it requires a different mindset to actually operate and go fast. There is a debate, continues to be debate in this process stuff, whether you should optimize first and then automate, or should you automate and optimize. I'm a believer from experience now that if you automate what you have, more than likely you'll get about 15 to 20% of benefit. I'm not against optimization. As a matter of fact, I think you should automate first, take the 20% and have a wave two that optimizes to move that 20% to 30, 40, 50, 70, 80, whatever your target is. So that in the time you're optimizing, you can still reap the benefit of the 20%. And that just goes back to saying, how do you get going faster, right? Focus on the results. Lots of people tell me, hey, we have 4,000 RPAs, we have 800 RPAs. Just from experience, I've learned it's not the number of RPAs that actually matter, it's the value that they create. So don't get sidelined or sidetracked by having 80 RPAs. Doesn't mean there's actually better. You can have 10 RPAs that create $4 million of benefit versus 80 RPAs that only produce $500,000 of benefit. And leverage process mining tools, which brings me to the next point. Process mining is what's happening in, let's say, your ERP. Let's say you take procure to pay, for example, right? What is actually happening and how are people actually interacting with the system? And what are the processes they're actually following versus what you think they're doing? And there's lots of opportunity when it comes to that, where you can identify opportunities to drive operational excellence, because you'll find that processes that people are executing in a system aren't exactly what you thought. And there's lots of efficiencies and automation to be done there. Again, goes back to reducing costs. So identify one, minimalist approach. Don't identify and take 7 months to do 500 processes. Pick one, get going. Focus on ERP systems because they're easier, they're bigger, and you can have a lot of end-to-end work processes that you can identify within the company, and analyze when you get the results from these tools. Analyze what is actually happening versus what you actually expected, and you'll find that there'll be some changes in systems, there'll be changes in processes. There's a change management element to it of getting people to do things differently. And you'll find there'll be a lot of opportunities for RPAs as well, because in that process, you'll find that there are some inefficiencies that are happening. And what I can tell you is that people will thank you for it, as a matter of fact, because there's lots of pain and suffering that happens in people, on staff, that are doing some of this work where they just can't believe they're still doing it. So automation and really kind of streamlining that. And remember, if you really want to know how the process works today, then process mining is a great way of getting there, because RPAs won't solve that problem for you, right? And use that information to improve your process maturity. So as you find how things are actually working, then it gives you a chance to really understand, what that looks like and what do you need to do to change it. And always, 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 as it is from all the operational excellence people, always focus on results, really measure what you're trying to do, and really understand how you iterate. My challenge to you would be that you just do it faster in a time like this, because you don't have a lot of time. And the faster you go, the better it is. It is possible that you may have some missteps, but that's okay. That's okay, because you can always recover from it and do something different. So some leadership requirements to actually drive this to some degree of closure. As always, vision, strategy, and outcomes are important. You have to have an end state that you want. You have to kind of know and be able to touch and feel what an outcome looks like. So none of that goes away. One of the things I've found in all of this is that the fundamentals of running a business never go away. Doesn't matter what technology it is, doesn't matter what framework you use, the fundamentals are always the fundamentals, and that's across industries, not just within oil and gas. But it is important. It is important to make sure that you think, but I would challenge you that besides the vision, everything else that you do take also a minimalist approach, because you have to, one, use that vision to bring people along, to really understand what it is they're trying to do and why. But even strategies can change and outcomes can change because you live in rapid innovation, right? And that's why hyper awareness and agility is important. Hyper awareness is, are you really aware of what's happening within the industry and the changes and disruptions and innovations that are happening that lets you capitalize on that to change a model or change your drivers or change your delivery mechanism to drive operational excellence that you want? It is true for this industry as well. Absolutely. There's lots of work that's happened. If you look at actually the field, and I'm a big supporter of the field when it comes to field force and field staff, they live this stuff. I don't know, I am not sure if all that discipline has always kind of translated to the back office. And it is time now to really focus on the back office and say, are we really as efficient as we could be? Do you really understand what that looks like? And it's happening across this industry. Lean governance, agility, hyper awareness is being aware. Agility is being able to navigate and pivot depending upon what's happening. Because you do live in this industry in a time of rapid change, whether it's IoT, whether it's all the other technologies and tools that are emerging, whether it's around analytics, whether it's around AI and ML, they're actually disrupting and giving you lots of opportunity to drive that efficiency that you're looking for, or that excellence that you're looking for. Lean governance, help teams get work done versus getting in the way. I always encourage, from a governance perspective, to have leaders say, what is it that I can do to move the needle faster versus, hey, give me more. Because it takes the team time away from giving you more, from actually the work that needs to be done to actually deliver on the excellence agenda that you want. Really, systems and design thinking. I think many of you probably know this. Design thinking is technique, empathy, etc., prototyping, rapid, sure, right? And systems thinking, saying the largest system is made up of components. Do you really understand how that works? And I would challenge you to really, really, really resist the temptation to start everything and be really broad in this particular case. It can take a lot of energy within organizations that are dealing with a lot of things, that there's just a lot of fatigue. So sometimes it is easier and better to just start, show some results, scale faster, and see how that works. Getting teams started is better than thinking about starting, for sure. That goes back to some agile principles. When I talk about agile, I'm not really talking about a methodology per se, as it is thinking from a business perspective. Agility, hyper awareness, understanding what your outcomes want, what you want, being open to the fact that we need to pivot because of disruption that's happening around you, I think is one of those core leadership competencies, I believe, now and moving forward for every organization, especially within oil and gas, to really pay attention to. Always focus on the end state. I have this thing about a doneness criteria, and some of these things are hard. They're hard because you really have to think about, what does done look like for you, right? And again, I don't preach that you should have 8 months of big workshops to really think about, because from a leadership perspective, it's more important what you think done is, and then socialize that with different people, different stakeholders within the organization. Use that as an input to really crystallize and crisp what doneness means and what it looks like. And if you have that, you'll find that the agenda moves faster because everybody's kind of clear. So in this kind of environment, and as we experience it as we go, I would say start small, scale fast, stay limble, and results really, really, really matter. And be open to the fact that those results may be different at some point in time. And because your environment is changing around you in an industry that is in rapid change because of all the different pressures that it faces. So you have to go and make sure that you're actually getting some of these things done. So are these easy to do? They're not, right? Because it takes energy and effort among all the other priorities that you have. But the question is, if not now, when, right? If not in this pandemic or these other areas of disruption and or other that are happening, when would you do it, right? And why wouldn't you want to do it today, especially when what you need from a tools and technology perspective is available to you at a fairly low cost and doesn't require large, broad implementation scale of millions of dollars to do it? Why wouldn't you want to start small and see and test and scale fast? And that's what I would leave with you in this context. Is the industry changing? Absolutely it is. Is it changing faster? In some cases, in some areas for sure. In others, it'll catch up, right? Because disruption will force all of us to do that. The question is, do you want to get ahead of it now, or do you want to be forced to do it? And that's true for this industry, as it is for a lot of industries that have happened, that are facing this problem today. So with that, thank you for your time. I hope you found that useful. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can get in touch with me and we can talk further.
Very good, Biju. Very, very good. Thank you very much for that. And I'm going to ask everybody now who hasn't submitted their questions yet, go ahead and submit it. I'm going to pick up the first few here that were submitted and relay that to Biju. So Biju, Ana Martinez had the first question for you. And let me pop this out so I can see the questions in a larger screen. So Anna says, great presentation. And what is your advice about getting individuals to understand that some tasks can be automated, like placing a PO using RPA? What is your advice to those who only know one way of doing things, which is the manual way? And how you start moving them in that new direction?
Yeah, it's a great question. Been through it. So one is, the challenge with, I think, a lot of the automation stuff is people actually don't believe that it's possible. Many cases, I've seen this a lot, right? People are like, no, that can't be. So I would say just take a small example and automate it. That's what I would say. I think seeing is believing in many cases. I have found actually that when people see that it can be done in real terms, because you've actually taken something and automated, they actually thank you because they're like, oh my God, like, thank God I don't have to do that again, right? So that's where this start small, scale fast comes from, right? If you now take a big finance process and you're like, I'm going to do the whole thing, don't do that. Pick that small one element of a process, build it out fairly quickly, because I think it's about 3 to 4 week turnaround time, and demonstrate to people that it is possible, right? Once they see it, I can guarantee you that they will move, because most people who are doing these routine mundane tasks don't want to do it. They don't. I've heard people say, this is like the best thing that's happened to me because now I actually can do something else. Yeah.
Very good. Another question that we have here, Biju, is related more to it's a broader industry question. Sure. I mean, there's a major disruption going on and a dislocation in the oil and gas industry. Some of the forces that you talked about were happening before the pandemic took place. And then the pandemic just exacerbated everything. Okay. And so the question is, how do you see the industry playing out in the next few months, maybe in the next year or so? And we understand, big disclaimer here before he even answers this question, is that nobody can really predict the future, obviously, but we'll take this as just an educated guess on based on what you see across the industry. How do you think the next few months will play out?
Yeah, I think, as an industry, I think next few months will be harder. I mean, if you look at sort of what's happening in the pandemic, I think, as the economies open, I think we've seen a surge of infections again. Some countries have been able to manage. As a matter of fact, even countries that have managed it. Japan, I was just reading yesterday, Japan was proclaimed as the model to follow, and now they've found infections are going up again. So I think it'll be tough probably for the next 3 to 6 months. I wouldn't even say next couple of months. If there's a vaccine, I think even then it'll take some time to actually have a global use of it, and even then with testing. So are we in for some tough times as an industry? Absolutely. And that's more the reason to kind of drive this agenda now, so that you can have those reserves and or other capacity to survive for the next 3, 6, 8 months while this happens. And even when the vaccine's out, I think it'll be another 6 months after that before all of us have access to it, right? And that's the scary part of it. But I guess for governments, you had to open up. Otherwise, how would you actually know? That's the problem with this, is you can't really predict it unless you actually try it. So in Toronto, I think we've been pretty good. We have about 130 some odd, 120 cases or so every day, which is dramatically different than it was, let's say, 3 months ago, and that just comes from this discipline. So it's tough time for sure. It's not going to get easier, I think. Yeah.
Do you see more consolidation happening in the industry as a result of what's going on here?
I think
there are
so.
sectors that are more affected than others?
I think so. And I think there'll be consolidation of even within the industry. I think not all sectors or not all companies have kind of the strength that perhaps the bigger ones do to sustain. And as long as these prices don't, stay, and as long as this supply demand stuff doesn't change, yeah, I think you'll see companies go through some really tough times. There may be more mergers and acquisitions, don't know, but it also depends on, even for the big companies, what their forecast is. Yeah, it's a very unpredictable time. I don't think it's happened like this before.
And in your view, currently, what sectors of the industry maybe are faring better relatively to others?
I think wherever there's a regulated kind of industries, like I think like if you look at our gas business, I think it's a regulated business wherever there is. But even that, there's some customer and consumer pressures, right? But anybody in the oil business is hurting for sure. And it'll be interesting to see whether as we come out of this, whether there'll be more diversification as well within companies, and like, what, maybe we should not be just a one-trick pony. Maybe we should diversify and have multiple sources of revenue, so that in times like this you can sustain. And the renewables is real. I think renewable business, as far as I know, in general, hasn't really been impacted per se. So there's something to be said for that, for sure. So I think we'll see that. We may see more merger and acquisition, plus I think there'll be diversification further, or maybe contraction or focus on some very reliable revenue streams, which these days, who knows? Who knows what that is, because everything changes, right? So
That's right. That's right. So this is a question actually posed by Eklak Khan related, and you addressed some of this about changes in the energy sector in terms of business models and organization restructure. And Eklak also had another question more specific to operational excellence strategies, especially with your cross-industry knowledge. Are there specific operational excellence strategies in the energy industry that may be unique, somewhat unique, compared to healthcare, telecom, and all those other industries? Is there a specific OE roadmap for the energy industry that you're aware of?
You know what? I think one thing I've come to the conclusion is I think the fundamentals, like I said, are always the same. Every industry has something, whether it's regulatory, whether it's legal, whether it's whatever. Every industry, I think, has its own kind of a constraint model, but I think the fundamentals of driving operational excellence are the same. You really need to know kind of you really need to understand how you're working, whether that's the best thing. You really need to be clear on what the outcome looks like, and are you really measuring the right things to know whether you're driving to that or not. And I think in operational excellence context, I think that's easier to do across. The numbers speak, but you don't want to have so many numbers that you can't figure out exactly what's going on. So that's where the thinking comes in, right? Like, what is the minimum that you need to really know whether you're working the best way possible? And connecting that to business outcomes, I think, is whether it's technology, whether it's HR, supply chain. I think you have to look from an outcome perspective. So is there something specific? Not that I'm aware of, but definitely I think the process of saying, this is what we want as a company, and kind of working backwards to say, how do you make it happen? And how do you measure what's happening to really know in a minimalistic way? I think always gets you there faster.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Along those lines, the next question here asks about whether oil and gas companies, are they slower to adapt technological changes than other industries are?
Yeah, I would say yes. I think, but if you look at oil and gas for sure, like if you look at renewables, everything's kind of greenfield, so they kind of start their own, right? Are they slower? Yes. And that's because I think the industry's had the benefit of many years of high commodity prices, of revenue streams that have been there. So a lot of times you don't really have a burning platform to drive it, because if you think about how the industry works, and every time there's some sort of an incident, like they mobilize so quickly, right? And it's a case to be looked at, actually. It's like almost like Navy SEAL teams, right? If there's an incident, like the company will move heaven and earth to fix it, to do something about it, because that's a kind of a burning platform. So I think at large, maybe the industry suffers from that. You have to have some sort of a crisis to actually mobilize, and that's not a judgment of people. I think that it's a habit, right? And today, now we have, a lot of companies had to move people, remote working, when this industry, like everything else, debated about working from home for years, right? But within weeks, everybody was working from home and everything was set. And there's lots of now thing, well, productivity is up and so on. So my personal view is that this industry kind of requires a burning platform. But when there's that burning platform, then look out, because it will mobilize to meet its new horizon as quickly as possible. And I think that's what's happening now. Which is you don't have a lot of choices, and especially in an unpredictable future. So should what do you focus on? I think you're prioritizing faster. I think we're looking at value generation faster. You're looking at asset investment planning and kind of risk cost performance, like all these things that have occurred. I think those are faster. So yeah, I think if you're in this model, for people even who are trying to automate and all this process mining stuff, this may be the best time to really gain some traction. But the key is, how do you execute fast and show results fast so that people don't lose interest? And I think once you do that and you have a little bit of traction, then I think it's a snowball effect, and people will come. It's a very easy case to make. We're doing manual today, you're not doing manual tomorrow. Nothing could be clearer than that, right? Yeah.
To illustrate what you're just saying there, working across multiple industries as well, and specific in the energy industry, we had been on digital transformation journeys for the past 5 years, and we couldn't get it done. And because there was enterprise risk management and multiple layers of attorneys to go through to get a simple change done, and security risks that were going to break us. Anyway, long story short, after the pandemic, a 5-year transformation was done in 5 days. And So
Exactly.
as you said,
Exactly.
that burning platform does seem to be the needed for the oil and gas industry. Now, and I'm just curious. Now, this is just me, personal question. I
Sure.
think by working in the industry, part of the reason for that is that the industry has been around for decades, if
Of
not
course.
centuries, and
Of course.
and there are very smart people in there, and there is this hyper awareness about safety and security as it should
Absolutely.
be,
Should be.
and maybe it's a
Absolutely.
combination of those factors that make it difficult for them to drive change from within without the burning platform.
Yeah, I think safety, of course, in this industry, I think it's paramount. It's critical. Even for us, one of our values is around safety. So of course, right? I think in times like this, from a leadership perspective, I think you have to lead from a position of curiosity to really examine what it is that you have, and let kind of go back to, and operations excellence people are always kind of driven by facts. And you always try to find that nugget of information that gives you a clue. I would argue that everybody should do that now. This is the time to be really curious about and really challenge yourself, saying, is that really what it is? Is that for the longest time, for example, everybody talked about safety and risk and so on. Then asset investment planning kind of came into the picture and saying, well, there's a balance, right? And yeah, risk is important, of course, right? You have to have the license to operate. Of course, safety is important. Of course, performance is important. So what is that optimal balance that you find across versus skewing one or the other because the consequences are bad? So it can become difficult, but I think you have to say, what are your options today? What are you going to do? And I think people find that if you kind of go by fact, you really become curious about every aspect of the business you're in. I think there's opportunity for sure. I mean, I think it would be unfair of us to say that there's no opportunity within organizations at any given time, let alone the pandemic, at any given time. That's what operations excellence people do, right? They find stuff based on fact. Yeah.
Yeah. So the next question here, Biju, is about the electrification of society to a large extent, and the question is, what is your view on the impact that is going to have on the oil and gas industry? I mean, that was already again happening before the pandemic. There is an assumption here that it's accelerated as a result of the pandemic. Is it, I mean, the oil and gas industry tends to overall dismiss it as, it's the less than 1% type of thing, but has that changed, or is still the same?
I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think that changed. I think the industry is, as I talk to my peers, I think we're still trying to figure out what that is and what that actually means. But across, I mean, I think everybody's facing that. I think the worst you can do in any situation is not, I think that's where the hyper awareness comes from. Be really aware about what's happening around you so that you can craft and mold strategies. Is that a big topic of conversation? I don't think so. Will that be a big topic of conversation once we slowly get out of this and say, hey, how did the world change? Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. I mean, I don't think it's something we can ignore, right? I don't think any industry can ignore is kind of what's happening around it. And it will be different. I mean, before the session we're talking where you said, hey, 30%, I agree with you. I mean, to say that we will come out of this being exactly the same, even not only how we do business, even how we work, what leadership looks like, how we manage people, and kind of how we go through it, I think it'll be different. And the electrification pieces will come. I think it'll be a topic of conversation today. No different than on the other side of the industry. If you're in the electricity business, you should be thinking about what's going to happen when you have a solar panel on your roof with a small wind turbine. Like, if you're in that industry, you better start thinking about how you're going to monetize that, right? Otherwise, centralized energy distribution, I think will go. I think it'll be distributed. I think you'll be contributing to the grid. That's what I think. I think you'll be generating enough to run your house and everything else, and contribute to the grid for the other industries who can use it. So if you're in any sector of the energy industry, you should be thinking about what decentralization looks like and
That's
how you
right.
like to operate and monetize. Yeah.
That's right. I have an energy CEO that I work with that says that this industry has very long cycles, and if you think about it, a while back, this distributed energy was the way that everybody operated, right? You
That's
had
right.
a little diesel generator somewhere, and
That's right.
and then one day became centralized, and we're seeing now reversal into decentralization. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and that technology is changing, right? I mean, the cost of solar is actually going down. You know,
yeah,
it's becoming more and more favorable. The ROI is lesser, faster and faster. Uh, and yeah, I mean, there are already people who live off the grid.
yeah.
One of these days, somebody's going to ask if they can live off the grid. Why can't we all live off the grid?
That's
So
right.
for people like me, it's like, oh, I don't know. We're in the energy business, but that's life. Yeah.
Biju, thank you so much for taking
No,
the
thank
time to
you.
come here, share your expertise with us, and we really appreciate it. And
No, thank you for
it's
having me.
it's a real honor and privilege to have you here and talk to our audience directly. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everybody who listened in for the questions. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, this wraps up this segment of Oil and Gas Live. At the top of the hour, we're going to be coming back with Christopher Hull, who's going to talk to us about process excellence and how to navigate uncertainty and prepare for the future by using a process excellence approach. And Chris is going to talk to us about technology, about the process excellence approach, and how we combine all those factors. So we are going to close this segment. We're going to log back on at the top of the hour, and we hope to see you back then. Thank you. Bye-bye.